We hear the voice of God calling, "Love your neighbor as yourself." We feel the Spirit moving amongst us, moving us to acts of compassion and justice. We know the love of Jesus. We love because Christ first loved us. Come, worship God together. Come, let us serve our God who calls us by name. Please join me in prayer. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, when we ask, "Who is my neighbor?" you tell us our neighbor is the righteous and the unrighteous, the just and the wicked. Who else is my neighbor? The rich and the poor, the weak and the strong. Is anyone else my neighbor? The great and the small, the arrogant and the humble. They are no different than I am. God, we have been so blind. Have mercy upon us. Open your eyes and see the neighbor next to us, surrounding us, so that we may love them like you have called us to do. Amen.
There is a name I love to hear, I love to sing its worth. It sounds like music in my ear, the sweetest name on earth. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me. It tells me of a Savior's love, who died to set me free. It tells me of his precious blood, the sinner's perfect plea. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me. It tells of one whose loving heart can feel my deepest woe, who in each sorrow bears a part that none can bear below. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me.
Hey there, VBS is over, and it is time for me to show you all of the awesome highlights from our VBS week. But before I do that, I just want to thank all of the people who played a role in making this VBS happen this year. It looked way different than what we expected, but it was still so much fun. So thank you to everyone who served this VBS by donating off of our Amazon wish list. You made those kits happen, so thank you. Thank you to everyone who jumped up on stage with me with no hesitation to do goofy things to make large groups super fun for these kids. Thank you to all of my small group leaders who poured into our kids and our families throughout this week. Thank you to everyone who prayed over our families, over our leaders, and over these kids as the week went on. And thank you, parents and families. I know you played a totally different role than you normally do in VBS. You totally stepped up. You opened those Zoom meetings for those small groups, helped your kids with crafts, and prayed over them throughout this week. And I just want to thank you for doing that. You are so appreciated. So that's it. It's over. VBS is done, and I'm so excited to show you some of the highlights from this week. Have a great rest of your summer.
You are above every other. Your love amazes me. You created every beautiful color for everyone to see. I want the world to know, I want my life to show just what your love has done for me. In your love I'm free, in your love I'm forgiven, forgiven. Your love it makes me sing, your love it gives me a reason to lift my voice, yeah. Oh. This is my faith, this is my focus, all of my days. I know where my hope is, I'll live it loud, I'll shout the chorus, because I know, oh, you're always for us. And even when it's hard for me to see, I will trust in you, I will believe. And even when it's hard for me to see, I will trust in you, I will believe. And keep on looking to you for where I'm going, knowing you go there too. I'll keep on looking to you. I'll fix my eyes on you. You are my only focus. You are my only focus. You are my only focus. I fix my eyes on you. This is my faith, this is my focus, all of my days. I know where my hope is, I'll live it loud, I'll shout the chorus, because I know, oh, you're always for us. And even when it's hard for me to see, I will trust in you, I will believe. And even when it's hard for me to see, I will trust in you, I will believe. And keep on looking to you for where I'm going, knowing you go there too. I'll keep on looking to you. I'll fix my eyes on you. You are my only focus. You are my only focus. You are my only focus. I fix my eyes on you, oh yeah, oh yeah. Woo! You ready? Come on, let's go. Hands in the air, hands in the air. I know you're there, I know you're there. Anywhere, oh. Anywhere. I fix my eyes on you, you. Hands in the air, hands in the air. I know you're there, I know you're there. Anywhere, I fix my eyes on you, and keep on looking to you for where I'm going, knowing you go there too. I'll keep on looking to you. I'll fix my eyes on you. You are my only, you are my only focus. You are my only focus. I fix my eyes on you, on you.
We are the church. We continue to be the church, the life, love, and ministry of Jesus. Even in these challenging times, and it is for uncertain times such as these that the church is called, even more, to be the peaceful presence of Christ, sharing the light of hope. The tithes and offerings we give support the vital ministries of the church and are themselves hopeful acts of faith. With the tithes and gifts we give, we are able to continue to be in ministry and find new ways to connect imperfect people to our perfect God in life-changing ways. If you're able to give freely, give joyfully, give abundantly, and give with confidence that God will bless and multiply the gifts we give. You can choose one of the multiple ways we've arranged for giving online, with your phone, or by mail. Remember, 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7 says we should give as we have decided in our heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, but with gladness. So let us give out tithes and offerings to God with gladness, knowing we've been given the opportunity to be a part of the life-changing ministry of the body of Christ.
O Church of God, united to serve one common Lord, proclaim to all one message with hearts in glad accord. Christ ever goes before us, we follow day by day, with strong and eager footsteps along the upward way. From every land and nation, the ordered ranks appear to serve one valiant leader. They come from far and near. They chant their one confession. They praise one living Lord and place their sure dependence upon His saving word. Though creeds and tongues may differ, they speak, O Christ, of Thee, and in Thy loving Spirit we shall one people be. Lord, may our faithful service and singleness of aim proclaim to all the power of Thy redeeming name. May Thy great prayer be answered, that we may all be one, close bound by love united in Thee, God's blessed Son, to bring a signal witness, to make the pathway bright, that souls which grope in darkness may find the one true light.
Remember this portion of God's story from the book that we love. Psalm 86, verses 11 to 13. Teach me your way, O Lord, that I may walk in your truth. Give me an undivided heart to revere your name. I give thanks to you, O Lord my God, with my whole heart, and I will glorify your name forever. For great is your steadfast love toward me. You have delivered my soul from the depths of Sheol. And from Matthew 22, verses 36 to 40. Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? He said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets.
Good morning, everyone. It's Pastor Don. If things look a little unusual, that's because they are. That is, depending on how you define usual. If you define usual as me in the sanctuary preaching the sermon for our Sunday morning services, then yes, this is unusual. But that's a word that's a little difficult to define these days. So what is usual? But, I got to thinking about that, and I thought, well, maybe this was a good opportunity, this unusual circumstance. I'm right here in my mom's apartment in Decatur, Illinois, and I'm here because, if you've not heard, my mom had a medical emergency on Tuesday this last week, and she was rushed to the hospital by ambulance, and she's in the intensive care unit at the local hospital here. And so I'm here with her, trying to help take care of some of the things for her, and then, of course, being there for her. So she is getting better. She's improving, thanks be to God. So thank you, everyone, for your prayers. If you would continue to lift my mom up in prayer, I'd appreciate that. But we usually, again, there's that word, usual. What is that these days? But we usually have been recording the sermon on either Wednesday or Thursday, and then getting that prepared for the Sunday services. And I thought, well, I could try to run back and get that recorded and then come back up here to Decatur, or Pastor Brad could preach. And then I got to thinking about it, and I thought, well, wait a minute. Why not take this opportunity to be a teaching moment? And it has been for me, and I think hopefully it will be for us. And so I thought, rather than me trying to get home and try to do the usual thing, let's just live in the unusual. Because the reality is, we've been living in some pretty unusual circumstances for the last 4 weeks. And man, do we continue in that. It's just, how long, right? Like the text from last Sunday. How long, O Lords? But I wanted to just give us an opportunity, or to take this opportunity for us to learn something in this. So here we are, and here we go.
When did we forget how to love? Did it happen suddenly? Or was it a gradual decline? When did we forget the very foundation of the gospel? For God so loved. Love is what moved God to action. Love is what held Jesus to the cross. Love is what rolled away the stone. But we've forgotten that part. Without love, we are simply a resounding gong, a clanging cymbal, a bunch of noise. Without love, we are nothing. Is that what people see in us? Meaningless, empty noise? Love is supposed to be patient and kind, gentle, not angry or arrogant. Yet in our effort to stand on truth, we have forgotten the very thing these truths are based on. Love. Never once did Jesus fail in this. Not in his heartbreak or his anger. Not in his joy or his betrayal. His default has always been love. Maybe it's time the church was more like Jesus.
The series that I've been preaching and teaching these last few weeks about is called Exercise of Faith. And I've been looking at those practices of our faith that help us to be strengthened in our relationships with God and with each other, to exercise, to grow stronger in those relationships with one another. So in the first week, it was the exercise of lament. to weep, to be in that place where God says, "Come to me, those who are weary and burdened, and find rest." To know that weeping, sorrow lasts for the night, but joy is coming in the morning. And to come before God in that psalm that I read, and be still and know that God is. To just be in that place and let God be the one to build us up. And then last week it was listen, that specifically prayer, listening to God. And so we learn what it is to truly allow ourselves to listen carefully to how God would speak to us. And today it is to love. Lament, listen, and now love. And specifically, as Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, to love God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And in that text, Jesus inextricably connects loving God and loving our neighbor, so that we begin to learn what it means to love truly, to know that love that God talks about, that it's not just an easy love. You know, love can be easy, at least if we love those who love us, or just simply experience love like it comes. You know, we say, I can't control love, it just happens. Well, I don't disagree with that. I fell in love with my wife, and I didn't choose that, it just happened. But that's where it starts. I choose each day to engage that love, to grow in my loving relationship, not only with my wife, but with others. And so I want to talk about that today, about what that means. And let me give you an example. When I was in my previous appointment, a friend of mine, his name's Craig, he and I were talking one night. It'd been a long day, been a long night. We just finished a long meeting. It was after 9 o'clock. I was tired. It was a summer night, so it was hot outside still, kind of a night like these last few nights have been, where even after the sun goes down, it's in the upper 80s, and with the heat index, it's mid 90s or plus, and the humidity is oppressive. You go outside and you can't hardly catch your breath. And so I was going to go home, and Craig says, "So you're going to go home and just enjoy, relax, kind of wind down the night?" And I said, "No. Unfortunately, I'm going to go home and run." And then I had to explain to him what I meant by that was, well, I had decided that I wanted to, at that time, I was just getting ready to try to work my way up to a 5K, to run 3.1 miles. And so I was in training, and I decided I needed to do that. I would run one night, walk a night, run, walk, and just kind of extending that. And this was a night that I was supposed to run, and I didn't want to do it. That was the last thing that I wanted to do. And so I said something to Craig that I hadn't really thought about. It just sort of came out of my mouth, and I didn't even realize it until I said it. And that was, I said, no, I don't want to, but that's exactly why I have to go home and do it. I need to do it because I don't want to. I thought, wow, I hadn't really thought about that. But yeah, I didn't want to do it, but I had made the commitment that that's what I was going to do. And so I knew I had to make myself do it, because otherwise the next night or the next time that I didn't want to do it was going to be easier each time to just decide not to do it. That's love. That's unconditional love. That's choosing even when you don't want to. And that's why I say that Jesus inextricably ties love of neighbor to love of God. See, it's a whole lot easier, I think, in my estimation, for us to love God than it is to love our neighbor all the time. There's a story in 1 Samuel chapter 30 where we see David experience what this kind of pushing the edge of love is all about. The story is of David and 600 of his men. He's the captain of the armies. He's been anointed but not yet become the king. And so in this time, as he's leading the armies in many victories, they're all fighting a battle. And after the war, this battle has been won, and they're headed home. They're on their way home to a place called Ziklag. And Ziklag is a Philistine town, actually, but it's a place where David and all of his men and their families and stuff have settled for that in-between time, between the time of Bethlehem to before Jerusalem when he becomes king. And in that place, they're on their way home, and they're just ready to go home and put their feet up and enjoy. And they come back into the city, and they realize that Ziklag has been attacked by a band of raiders, Amalekites, and they have destroyed the city. They've burned their houses, and they've taken their children and their wives as captives and fled. And so David and his 600 men go off chasing after them. And while they're going on this long journey, they come to a great ravine. And it says in the story that 200 of the men stop and they stay behind because they're worn out. They just can't go any further. They can't make that pilgrimage or that pursuit anymore. And so 400 of the men and David go on. And they engage in a battle, and they fight, and they win the battle, and they retrieve what is theirs, plus all of the other spoils of that victory. And they get their families back, and their spouse, their wives, and they're on their way back, and they come back and they encounter these 200 men. And it says in the text that the 400 men say, no, we're not going to give to them anything of what we have gained, the spoils of this victory, except they're good enough, get this, to at least say, well, they can at least have their wives back and their families. We'll give them that. Well, that was big of them, right? But the rest of it, no way. David, it says no. That's not how we're going to do it. We're going to share what we have gained from this great victory. That was unconditional, unmerited. They didn't deserve it. That was love. And David demonstrated that. The others, the 400 men, they're like, you're crazy? These guys, they haven't done anything to help us. They sat back here and relaxed, put their feet up, and didn't do anything while we're all fighting this battle. And we won the victory by the sweat of our brow and the blood of our sacrifice. And they want to gain something? David said, yes, that's love. And that comes in some ways from the scriptures in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, which is actually what Jesus references. And in that it says this, don't bear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. So in this text, neighbor is defined at least as those who are of their people. And so these 200 men were of the same people, of the 400 men and David. And so they didn't hold a grudge against them, or the scriptures say don't hold a grudge. David knew that, and so he was sure to love, as the scriptures called him to love, and that was in an unmerited, undeserving way, to give freely. Jesus pushes that even further. Jesus challenges us not only to love those of our people who maybe don't deserve it, but he says to love those who definitely, in our estimations, don't deserve it, and that is our enemy. Love your enemy as yourself, he says. There's a story of a woman named Corrie ten Boom. Corrie ten Boom and her family, they're Dutch Christians. She was born and raised in the Netherlands, lived there during the rise of the Third Reich and the Nazis, and when the Nazis invaded, when Germany invaded the Netherlands, their family was involved, Corrie ten Boom's family was involved in hiding a lot of the Jews who were fleeing and helped protect them. And it was eventually found out that they were doing this, and Corrie and her family, they were then imprisoned in the concentration camps. She survived that, and after the liberation of the Allied forces, she eventually moved to the States, and she wrote a book, and it's called The Hiding Place, and there's since been a movie made about that, but that was one of her most famous writings about that experience of her family, hiding Jewish families during the war. And there's another story of Corrie when she's at a book signing of this book, The Hiding Place, and at that book signing, people are coming through the line, and she's signing the books. And this one man hands her a book, and she signs it, and as she's handing it back, they're making some small talk, and the man confesses to her that he was a former Nazi soldier who was one of the guards at the concentration camp. And Corrie recounts that story and says that it was in that moment that she had to face the awful grace of God. She had to know what it was to truly offer unconditional love. Unconditional love. Love that is not merited, that is not earned, that the other doesn't even deserve necessarily, but we're called nonetheless to give it. The text, the psalm that I read to, or that was read for us today that I'm preaching from, Psalm 87, says this: He has set his foundation on the holy mountain. God has given to us that example that the Lord God loves. For you are great, God, and do marvelous deeds. You alone are God. And then listen in verse 11 of 86. Teach me your way, O Lord, and I will walk in your truth. The psalmist goes on and says, Give me, God, an undivided heart, that I may praise you. And then in verse 13, for steadfast, or some interpretations say, for great is your love toward me. God's love is steadfast. It's not conditional. God's love doesn't just simply love us when God feels like it, or when we have earned it, or in a place where we're even reciprocating that love. But God's love is steadfast always. Steadfast is defined as unwavering. It never changes. The challenge is for us, and the reality is, the problem is, that's not us naturally. And that's why the psalmist says, teach me, God, teach me what it is to love. Not just when love is easy, not to love those who love me. That's what Jesus pushes against. And then even as Leviticus does, not just to love those who are like me, my people, even when they may not deserve it. But Jesus pushes even further than that and says, love those who hate you. There's a story also in Luke chapter 10 where Jesus is asked, who is my neighbor? And Christ gives them the story of what we know as the Good Samaritan. That there's a man who is traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he's robbed and beaten and left for dead, laying on the side of the road. And then it's said that a great religious man comes by of the Jewish community, and he can't stop because he's got too much on his mind, and he knows that it would make him unclean if he did this, and so he continues on. And then another man who's a very important and wealthy man among the Israelite people, comes by, and he can't be bothered because he's got too much to do, and so he moves on. And then there's a man who's a Samaritan. And you probably know, but in case you don't, Samaritans were a people that were seen by the Israelites as unclean, or at least those that they didn't mingle with, they didn't interact with. They were the other. You know, we have those others in our lives, whoever they might be, those who could even be defined or seen as enemy. And Jesus says that this man provides care and comfort and healing for the injured man who is unlike him, but nonetheless the Samaritan oversees or looks beyond that and sees the individual for what he is, a child of God, or who he is, and provides care, loves unconditionally, steadfastly. And so Jesus uses that parable, that story, to say this is what it is, what it looks like to love your neighbor. And that's why I say that Jesus inextricably ties then loving neighbor to loving God. You see, it could be easy for us to love God. I can say that, I love God. I'll go to church and read my Bible and pray and be faithful and be righteous and be sacred in all that I do, to be holy. But we can do that in isolation as individuals, and never really be challenged or pushed beyond that to live that out in the world around us, in the community, and most importantly, in relationship with others. That our godly relationship then is evidenced in our relationship with each other. I mean, that's what Jesus meant when he said that when you have done this unto the least of these my children, you have done it to me. When you have fed those who are hungry and given drink to those who are thirsty and visited those who are in prison. When you have shared love and life and hope with those that otherwise it'd be really easy to just look past as you live your life and travel on down the road. When you stop instead and offer aid and comfort in those places and times when it's not easy, that's when the exercise of our faith engages. That's when our ministry of loving really, really begins. I've shared that in this context today. As I said, I think it speaks to that because I thought, we could have done things in the usual way. But, I think that there's a lot to be learned when we are willing to wade into those difficult places, when we're willing to enter into the unusual, untested circumstances and be tested by those moments, that we're proven steadfast. And that's when God teaches us what steadfast love is. I hope that you're challenged. I hope that you'll think about this week and wonder, where are those places in my life when I have been challenged to love in steadfastness, when I've been challenged to not have a divided heart, to love some and not others, but to love unconditionally, to be steadfast in that, consistent in the ways that I apply the command to love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. I pray that for you, and I hope that for us together. Remember, as Paul said, press on towards that goal. We're not there yet, but we're in this together. So God bless you. Peace be with you.
I am thine, O Lord, I have heard thy voice, and it told thy love to me. But I long to rise in the arms of faith and be closer drawn to thee. Draw me nearer, nearer, blessed Lord, to the cross where thou hast died. Draw me nearer, 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 blessed Lord, to thy precious bleeding side. Consecrate me now to thy service, Lord, by the power of grace divine. Let my soul look up with a steadfast hope, and my will be lost in thine. Draw me nearer, nearer, blessed Lord, to the cross where thou hast died. Draw me nearer, 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 blessed Lord, to thy precious bleeding side. There are depths of love that I cannot know till I cross the narrow sea. There are heights of joy that I may not reach till I rest in peace with thee. Draw me nearer, nearer, blessed Lord, to the cross where thou hast died. Draw me nearer, 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 blessed Lord, to thy precious bleeding side.
not the news that any of us hoped that we would hear. It's not the road we would have chosen, no. The only thing that we can see is darkness up ahead. But you're asking me to lay my worries down and sing a song instead. And I didn't know I'd find you here in the middle of my deepest fear. But you are drawing near. You are overwhelming me with peace. So I lift my voice and sing. You're gonna carry us through everything. You are drawing near. You're overwhelming all my fears with peace. You say that I should come to you with everything I need. You're asking me to thank you even when the pain is deep. You promised that you'd come and meet us on the road ahead. And no matter what the fear says, you give me a reason to be glad. And I didn't know I'd find you here in the middle of my deepest fear. But you are drawing near. You are overwhelming me with peace. So I lift my voice and sing. You're gonna carry me through everything. You are drawing near. You're overwhelming all my fears with peace. Here in the middle of the lonely night, here in the middle of the losing fight, you're here in the middle of the deep regret, here when the healing hasn't happened yet, here in the middle of the desert place, here in the middle when I cannot see your face, here in the middle with your outstretched arms. You can see my pain and it breaks your heart. And I didn't know I'd find you here in the middle of my deepest